My name is Elena Hart, and 3 months ago, my mother stood in the kitchen and screamed, "If you walk out that door, don't ever ask us for help again." So I walked. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just took my bag, my car keys, and the last shred of dignity I had left, and I left the house I'd helped hold together for over a decade. She said those words with fire in her eyes, like she thought they would burn me into submission, like she expected me to come crawling back within days. But I didn't. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of Minneapolis, in a neighborhood with cracked sidewalks and creaky floors. But it was mine. No one asked me where I was going, no one followed, and no one checked if I had enough gas to make it across town. For 3 months, I didn't hear a word. No calls, no texts, no birthdays, silence. And it was beautiful. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't wake up with a phone notification that said, "Can you send $80 for the gas bill?" or "Your brother needs help with his car insurance." Just a little loan, sweetheart. Then last Thursday, as I was pouring my morning coffee before heading into work, my phone buzzed with a number I still hadn't blocked. My mother. The message was short. "Elena, we're in trouble. The house taxes are overdue. We could lose the house. Please, if you can help, we'd be grateful." I stared at the screen like it was written in another language. No apology. No acknowledgement of the words she'd screamed at me. Just an assumption I'd be there to catch the fall. Later that night, my father called. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't mention the months of silence. He simply asked, "Why haven't you paid the property taxes this time?" That's when I knew. In their eyes, nothing had changed. I was still the quiet daughter, the reliable one, the invisible wallet that lived somewhere downtown. I leaned against the kitchen counter and looked out the window at the dim parking lot lights, and I replied with 9 words that ended the conversation forever. "You said I'm not family, so now I'm not." There was silence on the other end. Not confusion, not even outrage, just silence. As if they had finally realized I meant it. I wasn't their plan B anymore. I wasn't their backup generator. I was done. That night I didn't cry. I didn't second-guess myself. I took a sip of my now cold coffee, sat down on my thrift store couch, and opened my laptop to check my budget. I had started calling it the Freedom File. The last line I added was labeled "Final Donation to people who only saw me as useful, not loved." 3 months earlier, I walked out of a house that never felt like home. What they didn't know was when I shut that door behind me, I wasn't planning on returning. Not even if the roof caved in, and now it finally had. Growing up in my family meant learning early what your role was. For my brother Mason, it was the golden child, the gifted one, the boy with potential. For me, it was something far less shiny. I was the one who got straight A's but was told not to brag. The one who stayed home while Mason got a car at 17. I was the one who never got into trouble, but also the one no one ever really noticed. When I was 10, I cleaned the entire kitchen after Thanksgiving dinner without being asked. My mom looked at me, then turned to Mason, who had just spilled cranberry sauce on the carpet, and said, "At least your sister is good for something." That was the first time I realized being helpful didn't mean being loved. It just meant being useful. Mason failed out of community college twice. He changed majors more times than I could count. For years, he drifted from job to job, landscaping, warehouse, part-time DJ, and each time he quit or got fired, Mom would sigh and say, "He's still figuring himself out." When I landed my first full-time job as a financial analyst at 24, her reaction was, "Well, don't get too comfortable. You don't want to burn out." Burnout. That's a word I didn't even know I was living until years later. At 26, I started helping with the bills. It was just $150 here and there at first, help with groceries, a late phone bill, a copay for my dad's medicine. Then Mason's car broke down and I paid for the repairs. Then the water heater needed replacing. Then the property taxes were due, and it would mean a lot if you could cover just this once. Each time I paid, I told myself it was temporary, that eventually they'd catch up and I could step back. But they never did. Because I never made them. Because I kept showing up card in hand, pretending it didn't hurt when they forgot my birthday, but remembered to ask for a gas card. I was their silent investment. reliable, unseen. And every time I came home, it was like I disappeared. One Thanksgiving, I arrived with a pumpkin pie I baked from scratch. My mom barely looked up. Mason showed up an hour late with a bag of fast food, and everyone laughed like it was charming. Classic Mason, they said. At least he showed up. When I brought up how much I'd been helping financially, my dad waved a hand. You're just being dramatic. Families help each other. But they weren't helping me. Not once did anyone ask if I could afford rent after covering the electric bill. Not once did they ask if I was okay after Mason totaled a car I had co-signed, and the debt fell on me. They just assumed I was okay. Because I never complained. Because I didn't make noise. My silence made me invisible. I remember one night vividly. I had just gotten home from work exhausted from closing a difficult quarter. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my blazer, staring at a $320 Venmo request from my mom. Mason needs help catching up on rent, just until his next paycheck. He didn't have a job. I didn't respond. I just stared at the screen until it went dark. That was the night I realized I had become a ghost in my own family. Not absent, just transparent. Always there, always contributing, but never acknowledged. Never enough. I stopped by the house less often. I started leaving group chats on mute. And for the first time in years, I said no when Mason asked if he could borrow my car. He sulked, told Mom, and she called me cold. What happened to the Elena who would do anything for family? She died quietly, I wanted to say. Buried under your expectations and Mason's excuses. The worst part wasn't the money, it was the erasure. The way I was treated like a donor, not a daughter. Like a line item in their budget, not a person with limits and feelings and fatigue. Like being reliable meant I didn't deserve grace, or care, or even thanks. I once overheard my mom on the phone with her sister saying, "At least Mason's around. Elena's always working or off doing her own thing." As if my distance wasn't a survival tactic. As if I hadn't tried again and again to be present, only to be met with blank stares and outstretched hands. I kept waiting for someone to see me, to ask me how I was, not what I could give. But that day never came. By the time my mom told me to leave and never ask for help again, I wasn't even shocked. Hurt, yes, but surprised, no. That moment wasn't the betrayal. It was just the punctuation. At the end of a sentence I'd been writing my whole life. One that started with being overlooked, continued with being exploited, and ended with a door closing behind me. I wasn't their daughter. I was their safety net. And they only noticed I was gone when the ground beneath them gave way. It's funny how you can be the glue holding everything together and still be treated like you're disposable. I think about that a lot now, especially on quiet Sunday mornings when the sun streams through the thin curtains of my apartment and the silence feels like a soft kind of freedom. Back then, I didn't know what freedom sounded like. I only knew the buzz of my phone, the guilt in my chest, and the sentence that followed every request. It's just until we get back on our feet. But they never got back on their feet. Because they never had to. I made it easy. I was the daughter who always picked up the phone, always transferred the money, always found a way even when I was behind on my own rent or skipping dinner to stretch my paycheck. I told myself it was love, that this is what family does. But the truth is, when love gets exploited, it stops being love and starts becoming obligation. In my budgeting spreadsheet, yes, I had one, I started tracking every favor I'd done since I got my first salaried job. At first, I didn't keep records. I thought that would make it feel transactional, cold. But after the 5th, just this once turned into the 10th and then the 20th, I realized something. They weren't forgetting to pay me back. They just never planned to. There was the $650 for Mason's dental surgery because he lost his temp job and his insurance expired. $120 to cover Dad's prescription after he forgot to renew his plan. $980 for a surprise property tax bill that Mom said she meant to take care of, but things were tight this month. That one came right before Christmas. I skipped buying gifts for coworkers so I could send it. No one asked if I had to sacrifice anything. When I gently brought it up just once, Mom got defensive. Elena, do you keep score on everything in life? Families don't operate on tabs. No, I wanted to say, but banks do. And I was beginning to feel like a walking bank account with no overdraft protection. I kept telling myself it would stop. That once Mason got it together, once Dad recovered, once Mom caught up on the taxes, I could pull back. But every time one fire was put out, another flared up. I was the only one bringing water. Everyone else just stood around watching things burn, asking me to fix it. When I told my therapist I'd finally started going after my first panic attack, that I felt like I was drowning while they stood on the dock waving, she nodded and said, "That's because they taught you your worth is in what you give, not who you are." That hit hard. I'd never thought of myself that way before. But it was true. Even when I was younger, praise came only when I was useful. Elena helped clean. Elena picked Mason up. Elena fixed it. I didn't exist outside of service, and I started to resent them. Not because I didn't want to help, but because I was never asked if I could, only expected to. And when I started saying no, when I simply drew a line, they called me selfish, cold, distant. Mason even told me once after I refused to co-sign another loan for his freelance equipment, "Wow, I guess money changed you." Money didn't change me. Realizing I was being used did. I remember one afternoon I came home carrying a bag of groceries I bought with the last $40 in my account. I walked into my parents' house because I was still stopping by then, and found Mason sprawled out on the couch scrolling his phone, a pizza box open beside him. He looked up and said, "Did you get almond milk?" Mom forgot. That was the moment something shifted. Not because of the milk, but because no one in that house noticed how tired I looked. No one offered to help carry the bags. No one asked if I'd eaten. I was their errand girl, their bailout fund, not their daughter. After that day, I started doing little experiments. I said no when Mason asked to borrow my car for a weekend trip. I said I didn't have cash when Mom asked for $100 to cover the gas bill. I watched their reactions like a scientist taking notes. Mom called me cold. Dad said I was acting too independent. Mason texted, "Don't get cocky just because you have a job." There it was, the quiet truth I had tried to ignore for years. They were fine with me succeeding as long as I stayed small about it, as long as I kept giving, as long as I didn't expect anything back. But I did expect something back. Not money, not recognition, just respect. And when that didn't come, when it became clear that their love was conditional on my compliance, I finally asked myself the question I had avoided for too long. What would happen if I stopped helping? That's when I started planning my exit. Not just from their house, but from the cycle, from the guilt, from the version of myself that believed staying small was safer than being seen. And when Mom finally said, "If you walk out that door, don't come back," I realized that wasn't a threat. It was permission. It happened on a Wednesday evening. I still remember the smell burnt takeout and cheap candles. I had just finished a 12-hour day at work, 2 back-to-back client calls, and a last-minute budget review. My body ached, my eyes stung, and I hadn't eaten since breakfast. But I still stopped by my parents' house because Mom said Mason needed a ride to the mechanic. Again. I walked through the front door with my tote bag still on my shoulder. Mason was sprawled on the couch gaming headset, on shouting into the mic about something urgent in a virtual war zone. Mom stood in the kitchen stirring soup like a martyr in an apron, and Dad was in the garage hammering away at a project he'd been pretending to finish for 3 years. No one said hello. I asked Mason what time he needed the ride. He didn't even turn around, just muttered, "I'll text you." And that was it. That was the last time I offered anything without being asked. The next morning I called Mom, told her I couldn't drive Mason anymore, that I had work, a life, a car with 130,000 miles on it that I didn't want him wrecking. There was a pause. Then she said with all the sharpness of a blade dipped in sugar, "Elena, you're really starting to act like a stranger in this family." I could have laughed. I wanted to. But instead, I asked her if she remembered how much I'd paid toward their taxes last year. She didn't answer. 2 days later, Mason sent me a text that said, "Wow, so you're just gonna let me figure this out alone?" Yes. Yes, I was. That weekend, I didn't show up to help clean the garage, or drive anyone, or pay for the overdue water bill that magically surfaced each month. I stayed home and read a book with a cup of mint tea. I turned my phone on silent and let the world forget I existed for 2 days. It was glorious, but to them, my absence was violence. Monday evening, I stopped by their house to return an extra key I no longer needed. I wasn't expecting a warm welcome, but I also wasn't expecting an ambush. I walked in and immediately felt it, the tension hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. Mom stood by the table with her arms crossed. Dad was leaning against the counter, mouth tight. Mason sat with his arms behind his head like he was waiting for a show. Elena, Mom said, voice sharp. This family is falling apart. Your father's job cut his hours. Mason is still recovering financially. I think it's time you contribute more. You have a good job, don't you? I stared at her stunned. I've been paying over $1,000 a month for nearly 2 years, I said, voice steady. What exactly is more? Dad cleared his throat. It's not just about money, it's about being responsible, being a daughter. And what's Mason, I asked. A guest? A child? A dependent, Mason scoffed. Don't drag me into this. No one forced you to pay. He wasn't wrong. They never forced me. They didn't have to. They just made me feel like saying no would mean abandoning them. And now that I had started saying it, even once the mask had come off. You've changed, Mom said, shaking her head. You used to be generous. Now you act like we're a burden. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just looked at all three of them, the people I'd bent myself backwards for, and said calmly, I'm not the one who changed. I just stopped pretending. That was when Mom snapped. If you don't want to be part of this family anymore, then fine, leave. But don't come crawling back when life knocks you down. Don't expect help. I picked up my keys, nodded once, and walked toward the door. I wasn't crawling. I was walking upright for the first time in my life, and I had no plans to turn around. The first night in my apartment felt off. Not scary, not even sad, just unfamiliar. I had moved into a second-floor unit in an old brick building just outside downtown Minneapolis. The walls were thin. The heater groaned like an old man, and the kitchen sink dripped no matter how tightly I turned the faucet. But it was mine. All of it. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed that first night, surrounded by boxes still in my work clothes. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even open the fridge. I just sat there and listened to the quiet, the absence of guilt, the stillness of being somewhere no one could expect anything from me. It was the first time I had space to breathe. For weeks, I waited for someone to reach out. Maybe Mason pretending like nothing happened. Maybe Mom sending a passive-aggressive text about family. But there was nothing. Only silence. And instead of hurting, it felt like air rushing into lungs I didn't realize had been crushed. I made a rule: no more money out unless I needed it. I opened a fresh budget spreadsheet and labeled the tabs rent, savings, groceries, and peace. I calculated how much I had given to my family over the past year. 12,000 won, $80.33. That number sat in the corner of the screen like a quiet scream. Rent I could have covered with ease. A used car, a semester of grad school. All gone, and no one ever said thank you. So I created a new line under it: final donation, paid in full. I started building habits that weren't centered around anyone else. I bought real groceries and cooked pasta with garlic and olive oil instead of eating crackers over the sink. I slept in on Saturdays. I didn't apologize for resting. I joined a yoga class on Wednesday nights. At first I felt out of place. Everyone there had colorful mats and knew the names of poses. I was just trying to stretch without falling over. But after a few weeks, I realized I wasn't there to be good. I was there to be present. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was allowed to just exist. One Saturday, I went to the farmer's market and bought a bundle of fresh rosemary and a loaf of bread from a woman who smiled like the world hadn't disappointed her. I remember thinking, is this what life feels like when it doesn't belong to everyone else? I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. Not the polished kind, just scribbles, anger memories, relief. Pages filled with phrases like, they never saw me. Being needed is not the same as being loved. I am not a bank account. I am not a Band-Aid. Each sentence was like stitching up a part of me that had been left open too long. I bought a small plant for the windowsill lavender because I'd read somewhere it helps with anxiety. I named it Lucy. When I forgot to water it one week, the leaves drooped. But it didn't die. It bounced back. And so did I. I started looking at apartments to maybe upgrade when my lease was up. Nothing fancy, just more sunlight, maybe a little balcony, a space where I could build something that felt like a home, not a house held together by guilt. The longer I stayed away, the clearer things became. It hadn't been a house full of people who loved me. It was a structure built on silence, expectations, and sacrifice. My sacrifice. And when I stopped offering it, the walls cracked. One evening, I sat at the window with a cup of tea and watched the sky turn orange. A neighbor's dog barked somewhere below. A train passed in the distance. I exhaled and said out loud to no one, "This is peace. This is mine." And I didn't feel guilty for having it. Not anymore. It was a Tuesday when the letter came. I almost threw it out thinking it was junk mail. A plain white envelope with the return address from the county treasurer's office. My name wasn't even listed properly, just a variation probably left over from a payment I had made months ago. Out of curiosity, I opened it. Inside was a delinquency notice for property tax addressed to the house I grew up in. At first, I thought it had been sent to me by mistake. Maybe I was still in their records from all those times I paid the tax for them. But then I looked closer. Amount due, $3,752.11. Status: final warning before lien enforcement. Due date: next month. I stared at the letter, the numbers blurring slightly as my mind caught up. The last time I had paid the tax was 7 months ago, right before Mom told me to leave. Since then, I hadn't sent a single dollar. Not for taxes. Not for anything. So why were they still putting my name down? That night, I called the county treasurer's office to clarify that I was no longer involved. The clerk asked if I had been the primary payer in the past. I confirmed yes, but only as a favor. He paused, then said, "You're not listed on the deed or mortgage, but your name has been used on payment memos multiple times. Technically, you're not responsible, but the system may still associate you due to payment history." I thanked him and hung up. Then I sat on my couch staring at the letter. It wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that even in my absence, they still counted on me, still expected me to clean up the mess, still assumed I would step in like I always had. I didn't reply. I didn't call. I just folded the letter and placed it inside the drawer of my desk beside an old photo of me at my college graduation, one that had never been framed, never put up in our house. The next day, the messages started. First from Mom. "Elena, I know things have been tense, but the house is in trouble. We could really use your help, just this once." Then from Dad. "This is still your home too, sweetheart. Please don't let the government take it." And finally from Mason. "So what, you're just gonna watch us lose everything?" Wow, no apology, no responsibility, just panic and expectation. I didn't respond. I wanted to. Oh, I wanted to. Not to comfort them, but to say, "You told me not to come back. You made that decision." But I held my tongue, because saying nothing said everything. 3 days later, I got a voicemail from Mom, her voice thick with emotion. "Elena, I know we hurt you, but this house is all we have. You grew up here. You'll regret it if we lose it. Please don't do this to your family." I listened to it 3 times, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to hear exactly how the guilt was packaged, how the responsibility was wrapped in sentiment. Please don't do this to your family. But I wasn't the one who did anything. I had left. I had made peace. I had walked away not in anger, but in survival. They had chosen to ignore the warnings. They had chosen not to pay the taxes. They had chosen to keep spending like someone else would catch the fall. And for years, that someone was me. Not anymore. That evening, I made myself dinner, just a salad and soup, but I plated it like I was at a 5-star restaurant. I lit a candle. I turned on jazz. I made my peace feel permanent. Then I opened my laptop, found the original PDF of the tax letter, and dragged it into the trash folder. I didn't need to hold on to it. I didn't need the reminder. The house wasn't mine. It never had been. I was reviewing expense reports at work when my phone buzzed again, Dad's name lighting up the screen. I stared at it for a second before pressing decline. A minute later, a text arrived. "Why haven't you paid this month?" That was it. No greeting, no context, no question mark. just a flat expectation as if my role hadn't changed, as if the family accountant had simply missed a scheduled transaction. I froze. This month I hadn't paid anything in over half a year. Had they really believed I was just... On pause, I opened my old banking app. Back when I was still helping, I'd set up recurring transfers $1,000 every 30th of the month, split between utilities, property tax, and emergency expenses. I had stopped them 7 months ago right after Mom said, "Don't come back." But clearly they hadn't replaced me. They hadn't prepared. They had just assumed I'd return eventually, that I'd get over it, that I'd fall back into line. Not because I wanted to, but because I always did. I closed my laptop, picked up the phone, and called. Just once. I was tired of letting silence speak for me. This time I wanted clarity. Mom picked up after one ring. "Elena," she said quickly, as if she had been waiting by the phone. "Before you say anything, just know we're not asking for a lot." "The house..." "Stop," I said. My voice was calm, measured. "I just want one answer." Silence. I continued. 8 months ago, I was still sending mortgage and tax money. Where did that money go? There was a pause. Then she began to stammer. "Well, your father needed some dental work. Mason's car broke down again. And things got tight. Groceries, gas, we always meant to catch up. So you used it," I said flatly. "Not for the house, but for everything else." Dad's voice suddenly appeared on speaker. "We didn't plan for this, Elena. But you left right when things got bad. You abandoned us." "No," I replied. "I stopped being your crutch. You're being dramatic," Mom snapped. "We didn't ask for a handout. You're our daughter. We assumed you'd step up." Mason's voice chimed in faintly in the background. "Without us, you'd be nothing. You forget who helped you get where you are." That was it. That was the sentence. Not a single one of them saw the irony. That I had succeeded not because of them, but despite them. I closed my eyes and exhaled. "I didn't forget," I said slowly. "I remember every ride I gave Mason, every bill I paid, every night I stayed up trying to figure out how to help without falling apart myself." "Elena, we didn't mean," Mom began, but I cut her off. "No, you meant exactly what you said. Don't ever ask for help again. Remember." That was the condition. I just followed through. Silence. I let it linger. For once, they could sit in the discomfort they were so used to passing on to me. Then I added, "You said I'm not family if I don't contribute. So I stopped contributing. And I guess that means I'm not family anymore." Mason muttered something crude in the background. Dad sighed heavily. Mom said, "You're being cruel." "No," I said calmly. "I'm being clear." And with that, I hung up. My hands weren't shaking. My voice hadn't risen. My heart didn't race. That phone call was years in the making, and now it was done. I scrolled through my contacts. Dad, blocked. Mom, blocked. Mason, blocked. Group chat, Hart family, left. Then I sent one final message to the group before I exited. "I'm not your backup plan anymore. Goodbye." There were no more calls, no more guilt-laced texts, just peace. And for the first time in my life, I realized silence could be a boundary, not a punishment. It was 2 weeks after that final phone call when the last attempt came. A handwritten letter from Mom, mailed to my apartment, which I had never given them the address to, but she must have gotten it from an old insurance document, or maybe one of the utility bills I used to pay. The envelope was thin, no return address. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper written in her cursive that I hadn't seen since she used to write lunch notes when I was in elementary school. Back when I still believed she saw me. "Elena, we know things have been hard, but this house, it's your childhood home. It's part of you, too. If we lose it, everything falls apart. Your father is struggling. Mason is trying. I know you feel hurt, but please do the right thing. Help us keep it, even just this once. Love, Mom." No acknowledgement, no apology. Just another appeal wrapped in nostalgia and guilt. I read it twice, then again. Not because I was confused, but because I was stunned at how familiar it all felt. Like muscle memory. They hadn't changed. They hadn't even paused to consider what I might feel. They only wanted the result: me stepping in, me fixing everything, me absorbing the consequences of their choices. But this time they were right about one thing. This house, this situation, it was part of me. Just not in the way they thought. It was part of me like a scar is part of the skin. Something that healed over after years of pain, but still throbs when the weather changes. And I wasn't going to reopen that wound just because they refused to treat the infection. So I took out my phone, opened my messages, and typed exactly what I needed to say. Not a paragraph, not a speech, just 9 words. You said I'm not family. So now I'm not. I sent it to all 3 of them. I didn't expect a response. And none came. I folded the letter and slid it into a folder marked past due. Not for bills, for boundaries. Then I poured myself a glass of water, sat on the floor beside the window, and watched the light fall across the room. The apartment was quiet, still. The fridge hummed. My rosemary plant, still alive, somehow swayed gently in the breeze from the cracked window. It was the kind of moment that would have once made me feel lonely, but now it just felt real. For years, I had given everything, time, money, energy, silence in the hope that I would finally be seen, that my sacrifices would buy me a seat at the table, a name in the story, a framed photo on the shelf. They never did, so I built a new table, wrote my own story, hung up pictures of the life I was creating, one where I wasn't a resource. I was a person with limits, with value, and with the power to say no. Later that night, I updated my budget spreadsheet. I added a new section titled Peace Maintenance. Under it, I listed a few things: yoga class renewal, $48 month Saturday bakery visits, $20 week savings transfer, $250 month responding to guilt texts. $0, I smiled, closed the laptop, and slept through the night without checking my phone once. I found out about this foreclosure through a neighbor. Mrs. Caldwell, the woman who lived 2 doors down from my parents for as long as I could remember, left a voicemail one morning. Her voice was soft but hesitant, like she wasn't sure whether she should be calling me at all. Elena, I just wanted to let you know, there's a county notice posted on your parents' front door. Something about a final sale. I didn't want you to be blindsided in case you didn't already know. I wasn't blindsided. I wasn't even surprised. But I still sat in silence for a few minutes, letting it sink in, not the news, but the realization that I didn't feel anything. No panic, no guilt, not even sadness. Just a steady, unwavering calm. Because that house, the one I paid to keep standing for so long, had never really been mine. I thought about all the things I used to believe made it home the hallway, with the dent from where Mason had thrown a football inside, the chipped tile in the kitchen where I spilled soup in 8th grade, the living room where I fell asleep on the couch more times than I could count because I was too tired to make it to bed after working 2 jobs in college. But none of those things made it home. They were just evidence. Proof that I had passed through, worked, contributed, been present, but never truly belonged. They had built a house. I had carried it. And when I stepped away, it crumbled. Not because I was cruel. Not because I wanted them to fail. But because they never maintained the foundation. They just leaned on me to hold it up. A week later, I walked past the house for the first time in months. It looked smaller than I remembered. The lawn had overgrown. A foreclosure sign sat crooked in the window. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the outline of boxes stacked against the wall. I didn't stop. I didn't knock. I just walked by with a quiet kind of reverence, like passing the grave of something long dead. Something I had grieved already. On the way back to my apartment, I stopped by a cafe and ordered my favorite almond croissant and a small cappuccino. The barista remembered my name. I left a tip and smiled without thinking about who might need that money more. It was mine. So was the moment. That evening, I lit a candle, curled up on my couch, and opened a book I'd been meaning to read for years, but never had time for because I had always been too busy fixing someone else's chaos. And somewhere between chapters, I realized something simple and profound. Walking away didn't make me heartless. It made me whole. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop proving your worth to people who only see you as a utility. They called me selfish, cold, ungrateful. But in truth, I was just done paying the price for their comfort, done explaining my boundaries, Done apologizing for saving myself. Now, when people ask if I talk to my family, I tell them the truth. No, but I finally talk to myself. And I actually listen. I don't know where they are now. Maybe they're staying with relatives. Maybe they figured something out. Maybe they're still blaming me. But that's no longer my weight to carry. And the only house I worry about now is the one I'm building inside myself. It's quiet here. And for once, I'm not afraid of the silence. I'm free.